So today we're going to talk about troubleshooting dry tester issues. There'll be times where all the units are failing and we'll think there's automatically an issue with the dry tester, but that's not always the case. So there's a few simple things that you can do before we call maintenance and have them take a look at the dry tester. More often than not, if all the units are failing, there's either an issue with the units, such as polytube striations in there that are creating leaks. Maybe there's a bad part, bad solenoids that we don't know of. But most of the time, it's going to be an issue with one of these connectors, one of the parts that seal. So if the dry tester's failing, most of the time the dry tester's doing its job because it's detecting that it's losing air. So the first thing we want to do is try to segregate where the leaks are coming from. So if someone calls you to the dry tester and they say all these units are failing, first thing you want to do is segregate where the issues are happening. So we're going to have a little tool kit, and for H-line we'll have this little teacup with a plug, so that's completely sealed off. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to block this off. So essentially what we're doing is we're determining if there's a leak still, even though there's no unit hooked up to it. So on the other end, same thing here. We have a tube we're going to put in here, and now this is completely capped off. So now there is no unit, we just taken the unit out of the equation. So now we're going to test. We're going to zoom in there and we're going to watch it. So now we want to know, does it still fail? If this fails, that means there's still a leak in here. Now if everything's good, if this passes and everything's good, well then it means there's a leak inside that unit. So we'll kind of watch this. All right, now for this sake, it just failed. So that means that there's a leak still somewhere from here all the way up into the dry tester. So now we're going to work our way back. So the next part we're going to do is we're going to eliminate this connector altogether. Now if you have the Cincinnati test connectors, take a look, there's actually two air hoses. This air hose here, it's actually just a cylinder for to make the cylinder go up and down. It does not have any bearing on whether there's a leak or not. So we don't even need to snoop this. But another option that you could do also while it's testing is you could snoop this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to now take this out of the equation. So we're going to remove the line from the testing portion. And a good practice every time you do that, just go ahead and cut this off. We'll use a little polytube cutter here because you can get a lot of marks and stuff from the collets that can create little air leaks. So that in itself could be an issue. So we're going to cut that off nice and clean, and now we're just going to cap that off. We're going to push that in, and then we're going to test it again. We're going to hit test, and again, while it's testing, as I mentioned lastly, you can actually do some snooping, and if you see bubbles like that, that might tell you where your leak is. So we'll just assume that it still failed. So the next step, we're going to go to this other end. We're going to remove this. Same thing, go ahead and cut it while you're here. As you can tell, this is chewed up pretty good. Definitely a good common practice to do that. So now we're going to cap this off. Same thing, you're more than happy to snoop this if you want as well, just to see, maybe if your polytube is bad further up. And now we're going to test this. So right now, we've completely isolated the dry testers from both your connectors. And in my experience, 9 out of 10 times there's an issue with the leak. It is either an issue with your seal or your main connector for your air supply. Especially on the H-line product, these gaskets can wear pretty quick. So we're testing this, and actually this is going to be pretty good. So that means if it's good now, we just found our leak. So now we can keep this out of the equation. Keep in mind this air is live, so you're going to shut off, disconnect the air pressure before removing this one, or else it'll whip around. So we're going to want to get this out of here, have maintenance take a look at it. But for the time being, what I'm going to do is I'll have just a spare Raymer valve that we'll put on here, and now we just found our problem. Now if it's still a leak, our next step is to follow the polytube all the way up through here, and you can snoop here underneath it as well. That's where the line comes in. Some dry testers will actually split off, because they'll put air on both sides. They'll have a T-fitting, but you can snoop that as well. Now if it still leaks, the very last thing that we do is we're going to perform a self-test You can take this off, and then there'll be a plug that you can cap in there, and then you can do a self-dry test. But at that point, if it still leaks, there's an issue with the dry tester, we're going to have to remove that. But most importantly, if you do a self-test, make sure you put the regular tube back in. All right?